Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever it is you are watching this playback. We welcome you to the session number 5, series number 5. And in this Board Bootcamp session, we're going to be talking about board development. Okay, so we're towards the end, and this is pretty much the fun area, I think, of the whole training, because you get to dive into what areas you might want to cultivate in yourself, as a professional, what areas you might want to cultivate in the group, as a unit that can move mountains, if you will, when it comes to how far you want to move or how far you want to progress your nonprofit forward. So I think this is a really, really interesting, fun, exciting area that we're going to talk about. In this first part, I gotta say this so my director doesn't get on me. If you haven't looked at the other sessions of this series, you can click the links below and it'll take you to those different sessions as well. Okay, now so we're gonna get into the first part of this discussion is highlighting adapting to change. So we're going to be talking about adapting to change in this part. And I have our friend and professional and colleague here, Wayne Tanner. He's going to help us out, flesh this area out more significantly today. So adapting to change, so we have 2 topics here. The first one says, what are common challenges new board members face when entering a nonprofit board? And again, with the backdrop of adapting to change. I guess we can start this off like this. So there are 2 areas here that I'm thinking of that might be friction. There's the area of stagnation. Now that's a bad thing, because if something is being done consistently and faithfully, like they say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But that's the organization has members already there, they're fixtures, they've become comfortable and confident with their process, their function on the board. Then you have the difficulty, if you will, of new board members coming in. They are, giddy with ideas, have different personalities, have different experiences. They want to come in and they want to throw them all on the table and then push forward. So there's a friction that's caused because you have from the one end the members who know how things are done to move the ship where it needs to go, and then on the other end you have the new members coming in saying, well, the world is bigger, we have more opportunities to move forward. So it's finding that happy medium in between. So that's to me that's one of the biggest challenges with when it comes to board members in nonprofits is how do you then appease or mitigate those difficulties when it comes to the 2 groups. And it's just not those 2 groups, so it can be issues inside the organization already, but as far as highlighting one of the biggest, most difficult areas that you might face, it's going to be with new ideas, the old way of doing things. Not that the old way is bad, it's just, one versus the other.
Sure.
So what would be your perspective on how a group might navigate themselves, maybe not through it, but to a happy medium where they can work productively together?
Well, I think part of it is going to be based on the success of the previous board members, the existing board. Best case scenario, you have an organization that the board actually understands what it is that they're there for. They've understood what their fiduciary responsibilities are. They understand what it is that they need to do from a legal perspective to make sure that they're in compliance with all the nonprofit rules and regulations. And that also they have been successful at growing the organization, at being able to attract new talent and new funding, and being able to get things so that the organization can continue to grow and to flourish. One of the challenges for a new person is going to be understanding what their role is from a very basic perspective. And hopefully the existing organization's board has job descriptions for the various people who are on the board, whether they be an officer or a director. And that I would say that a new board member really from the very get-go should be introduced to the bylaws of the organization. We've talked about bylaws in the past, and the bylaws basically give you a structure, so the new person then would have something that they could rely on, or at least something to fall back on. There is something to be said about the challenges of change, and I think that's something that a lot of organizations need to address. I think more of the established nonprofits nationwide are heavily populated with baby boomers, people in their 60s and 70s who have been there for a while, and now are faced with having to turn over the reins to the next generation. And unfortunately, I don't think we've done too much to help the next generation to understand what the requirements are of actually having a structurally and legally and organizationally sound entity. Everybody comes in with passion. And I think one of the things that I keep hearing about is, as having been a teacher for so long, you try to tell students to find your passion, to follow your passion. If you follow your passion, you'll be okay. But I think the reality behind that is that's not true. Passion doesn't pay the bills.
That's right.
So the idea of being on a nonprofit board, you more than likely have the passion for the cause. If not, you probably wouldn't have been invited. You're there because someone invited you. You're there because they perceive that you have certain skills, talents, treasures, and you're there because you probably have a good feel for what the organization does from a service perspective, and you're into that. You want to do those kind of things. You do those things maybe in other aspects of your life, in other organizations, maybe in something related to your job, maybe a church or something like that. But now you're entering into a different area of responsibility, because now you become a fiduciary. Right. So then you have to go through, at the very minimum, somebody's got to orient you towards the idea that the passion itself is great, and that's going to sustain you probably when times get tough in doing the work. But in order to successfully do the work, now you're not just the provider. You're not just a volunteer. You're not just a person that's looking to do change without having to have the responsibility associated with it. So, duty of care, duty of loyalty, duty of obedience, those things that we've talked about in previous sessions, become someplace where the person has to go back to so that they can start to understand what it is that their real responsibilities are going to be. Because now it's not just being the doer, right? Not just being a volunteer, not just trying to be the person doing good, but now you become the shepherd of the organization, so that you have to figure out what kind of things you now have to be able to do to make sure that the organization is successful and is compliant with the kind of things that need to be done.
Those are all very important aspects, and it leads me to the fact that every board member, even the ones who are already tenured, they're deeply rooted in the principles of what it is to be a board member. And bigger part of those principles is understanding, being very familiar with the bylaws, being very aware of their duty of care when it comes to that particular organization as a nonprofit. And to me, for new board members, it's important for them to go through that hazing period, if you will. Like they need to understand that, because as we talked about passion can be fleeting, right? So there's I love telling this story. It's a story about sailors back in the day up north, they used to see a great iceberg moving against the wind as they would go the other way, and they would be fearful because their boat is steered by the elements of the wind. But they come to find out that that was just a peak of the mass that was beneath the ocean, that was hooked up into the deep currents of the ocean and moving in its own way, regardless of what was happening on the outside. I think that's why it's important for new board members to get themselves deeply embedded in what the nature and the purpose of themselves as board members, bylaws, due of care, professional efficacy when it comes to how they are operating within that organization, so that they have their passion, but they know the direction that the nonprofit is going, and they can push that way and not be altered by the different things that are going to come against them from the outside. So I think that's very a very good point. And that to me would mitigate a lot of friction, because a lot of the pain, if you will, and frustration and just dedication and determination of sticking with what it is my responsibility, my duty as a board member is. That's tough. That's a job. You have a job to do, and understanding, okay, this is I have a job to do, I have a responsibility. It grounds you,
Sure.
and balances you out. And it balances some of those passions out too,
Right.
So I think that's important. So I think that's great. The next area that we're going to be going to is, again, adapting to change with the backdrop. How can new board members lean on existing board members when facing challenges? So this is a good one, and I think it carries on to the conversation we were just having, where it's a good idea. I think we talked about this in one of the previous sessions, that if we can get into the practice, again, there's a tons of baby boomers around the world who are filling those positions of board members, and they will eventually be forced, hey, here you go, we can't deal with this anymore, you need to take it on. And it may be uncomfortable for them, because the folks that they're handing it over to, it could be their grandkids, their kids' age, and they not necessarily trust in the soundness of their decision making. And one of the things to alleviate a little bit of that stress, that frustration, would be having some sort of mentor-mentee relationship when it comes to, okay, can we acclimate you to this first? Lean on me, pick my brain, watch me, and develop your own style, but at least you have someone to, hey, I don't know how to navigate this area. So I think that would be a really good aspect, but how easy or difficult is that to be integrated into our system of how we run boards today?
I think that's something that the organization and the boards themselves have to deal with. We start with looking back at the bylaws. One of the things that has been suggested is the possibility of term limits. So with term limits, what you're going to have is a continual exposure of new people. You can actually turn over the board. Let's say that you can have a 3-year term, and perhaps you set term limits and 3 terms maximum, so 9 years. The idea that within 9 years you should be able to make some difference, you should be able to do some good, and then maybe at that point in time it's time to move on. Now granted, it is difficult to find people who are willing to take the role of board member on, so sometimes you get stuck with people having to be there for 15, 20, 30 years, and sometimes that's okay, but at the same time, that does reflect a lack of the ability to change, because you get set in your ways. And so how this happens, perhaps you have an organization where the board structurally does not turn over very frequently. And it's difficult to lean on an existing board member, I think, in some aspects, because they've gotten, if they figured out what to do, they've gotten good at it, but just over the length of time. If you've been doing something for 20 years, then all of these duty of care, duty of loyalty, duty of obedience, all of the filings and things that are necessary, you just kind of learn from being around, right? And we both know as teachers, it's one thing to learn something, it's another thing to be able to teach it.
That's right.
So a lot of board members currently that have been doing good work are not necessarily teachers, and they're not also necessarily mentors. So it becomes difficult for a new board member to be able to lean on someone at times. I think the existing board has to become well aware of the fact that their responsibility is going to be to prepare the next generation of leadership for the organization. At the same time, go back to your iceberg analogy. It's a great analogy, because a lot of times a new board member comes on, and what they are used to seeing as far as leadership of the organization, is the tip of the iceberg. It's that one person perhaps that has become the face of the organization, right? But the organization moves as a whole, and the body is much bigger than just that tip of the iceberg, just that public face of the organization. And the new board member has to know from the get-go that corporate law mandates that board members do not act individually, they act as a body. Right? So the body is the only thing that actually can make a decision as to what the organization is going to do. And then the person has to know that they have to fit into that context, that they got a role to play, and what they want to do, what passion they have, may have to take a back seat for a while to what their responsibilities and their duties as a board member are. Now, with that, hopefully people start to come to understand that it's going to be their responsibility as a long-serving, long-tenured board member to be able to be there for new board members when the time comes that they need to be able to provide explanation, assistance, a little bit of the history of the organization. Because a lot of these guys and gals are the institutional member. So why are things being done in a certain way? Somebody new from the outside with great ideas and new energy might look at it and go like, from a management perspective or a strategy perspective, this is not the way it's supposed to be done. But perhaps there is a reason why that's being done. And that just has to be fleshed out. So that's when the existing board members truly have to be able to come out and say, hey, look, the reason we do it this way is we have found success in these areas, and we continue to find success. And the people that we work with, the things that we do, are best facilitated through these processes that we've established from the past.
I'm getting all of this because my experience with various clients and folks that you and I both know has been the challenge of muscle memory. So it's okay. We did it like this because the last one who left showed us these things. They didn't necessarily know why, because they were told, hey, X, Y, and Z needs to be done at all times. That's your responsibility. But what was behind the functionality of what you're doing might be very important, dire for the organization. But why? Why are we doing it that way? Because that allows us, again, I can't teach what I don't know, and I can, because I'm a human, and I can learn, I can be diligent, I can be focused, and I can perform functions, and that goes into having a muscle memory. But do I understand what I'm doing, why I'm doing it? That's very critical. So there is a bit of a void. I would say it's not a huge void, but it's a bit of a void. It's a struggle, it's a challenge with all board. I'm sure you all are experiencing these challenges as well, trying to find the best way forward, because all of us see on the horizon that it's in a few years the whole landscape, of board members and how it functions is going to be different, you know, and how do we maintain the strength and the success of the nonprofits in that difference, you know. Maybe fine, maybe not, you know, just a smooth transition, but again, there are a lot of things that are done currently that are very vital, very important, that we need to understand and be able to communicate to the next crew that comes in, because if not, they're gonna get there, but they might get there over a longer period of time and through a lot of unnecessary challenges and stress and strife with the board itself as well as the nonprofit has to, you know, go along with that, because the leadership are trying to find their way, and that necessarily is going to, you know, directly impact the nonprofit, which has to wait until the leadership finds their way. So I think it's important to really understand that that's a challenging area that I think not just nonprofit board, I think all boards, you know, face that, you know, trying to navigate their way forward. We will be getting into the training, because I think that training is critical on both, not just on new membership in, but also on the existing members, and you know, knowing, again, going back to well, I'm not necessarily a teacher or a leader. Well, how do I become one? Because eventually I'm going to have to pass the torch on to someone, and I'm going to have to be able to communicate to them what I need to communicate so that they're successful in their role. So having that type of training, another training. I do want to make this comment though about the, I can't take credit for the iceberg. That iceberg example is beautiful. I have to give credit because I know the family's probably watching. Earl Nightingale is the one that gave that first gave that analogy, and it was a great when he gave it, and I like saying it, I like explaining that analogy. It's really good. But that I think covers part one, adapting to change.